What have you done?
The Mojave dust was thick that July, the kind of suffocating heat that made decent people stay indoors and drove the desperate to liquor. Redemption, New Mexico was a town built on contradictions, a place where lawmen and outlaws drank in the same saloons, where fortunes could be made or lost on the turret card, where reputations meant everything and nothing simultaneously. Sheriff Jacob Hartwell had kept the peace and redemption for 18 years, and he'd done it through a combination of fairness and ruthlessness that the town both respected and feared. His daughter, Catherine, was 22 years old and had never known a world outside of Redemption's dusty streets. She was beautiful in a way that frontier women are beautiful, strong-boned and sun-kissed. With dark hair, she wore in a long braid down her back and eyes that suggested she'd seen more hardship than most women her age. She helped her father at the jail, bringing meals to prisoners, cleaning the cells, doing the work that no one else wanted to do. It was there she met Marcus. He was in the cell for armed robbery, a crime that in most territories would have resulted in hanging. But Marcus Ashford came from money, and money had certain privileges, even in frontier towns. His family had hired lawyers. The trial was pending. He was waiting. And Catherine brought him his breakfast every morning at dawn. The first time she really looked at him, really saw him, was on a Tuesday morning when the desert was still cool and the sun hadn't yet turned the world into an oven. Marcus was lying on the hard bunk, and there was something vulnerable about him in that moment. Something that suggested the expensive clothes and arrogant bearing she usually saw were a costume he wore to survive. "You're not sleeping," she said, setting the tray of food through the slot in the iron door. Marcus turned to look at her. He was maybe 30 years old, with sharp features and darker eyes that seemed to calculate everything they saw. "Would you sleep if you were waiting to hang?" "Are you?" Catherine asked. "Going to hang?" "My family doesn't think so. They've hired enough lawyers to paper the cell." He sat up and took the tray. "But I've seen justice in frontier towns. It rarely has anything to do with lawyers." Catherine should have walked away. Her father had made it clear that prisoners were to be treated with efficiency and nothing more. But something about Marcus's honesty, his refusal to pretend he wasn't terrified, made her stay. "Why did you rob a bank?" she asked. "Because I was desperate," Marcus said. "Because I'd lost everything gambling and my family had cut me off, and I was too proud to beg and too stupid to get a real job." He looked at her directly. "Because I made a choice that was supposed to be easy and turned out to be impossible." Over the following weeks, Catherine began to find reasons to linger in the jail. She cleaned Marcus's cell more thoroughly than necessary. She brought him extra food. She talked to him about books and life and the possibility of redemption. And Marcus, who'd spent most of his adult life moving from place to place, chasing experiences and running from consequences, found himself completely captivated by this woman who brought him the only kindness his current circumstances offered. One night, when her father was out on patrol, and the jail was empty except for Marcus and one other prisoner at the far end of the building, Marcus asked her to sit with him. "I know this is dangerous," he said through the bars. "I know you could lose everything if anyone found out. But I need you to know that you're the only reason I'm still breathing. Literally. Without you, I don't know if I'd make it through another day in this cell." Catherine sat on the hard wooden bench outside his cell. "My father would kill you if he knew you were saying these things." "I know," Marcus said, "but I'm going to die anyway, Catherine, either on the gallows or in some other frontier town doing something stupid. The only question left is whether I'll die having felt something real, and you make me feel something real." Catherine knew she should leave. She should report this conversation to her father. She should never speak to Marcus again. Instead, she reached through the bars and took his hand. 3 months later, when Catherine missed her second monthly bleeding, she understood that her life had fundamentally changed. She told no one. She wore loose dresses and made excuses about feeling ill. She avoided her father's eyes. And she waited. The trial came in September. The lawyers had done their work well. They'd made arguments about Marcus's family history, about his youth, about the possibility of rehabilitation. The judge, who'd known Jacob Hartwell for 20 years and owed him favors, was sympathetic. Instead of hanging, Marcus received a sentence of 10 years in the territorial prison at Santa Fe, a journey of several days from redemption. Catherine was 3 months pregnant when he left. She watched from her father's office as the marshals loaded Marcus into a carriage. He looked back once, and in that look was an entire conversation, a promise that he'd survive, that he'd come back, that he remembered every moment of what they'd shared. Then he was gone, and Catherine was left with the knowledge that she was carrying a child that would destroy everything. She managed to hide the pregnancy for another month. She was showing by November, and there was no way to explain it away. She told her father on a cold evening when the desert had turned crystalline under the stars, when the silence between them seemed to contain all the world's disappointment. "I'm pregnant," she said simply. Jacob didn't speak for a long moment. When he did, his voice was quiet in a way that was somehow worse than shouting. "Who?" "Someone you know." "Catherine, if you say Marcus Ashford, I will—" He couldn't finish the sentence. His hands were shaking with rage and something that might have been despair. "How long?" "Since before he left." Jacob walked to the window and looked out at the dark street. "That man is a criminal, a thief. He's worthless. And you threw away your entire future for what? A romantic fantasy? Some notion that you could fix him?" "I love him," Catherine said. "You're a fool," Jacob replied, but his voice had changed. It had lost its anger and taken on something worse. Disappointment. "Loving him doesn't matter. What matters is what this town will do when they discover that the sheriff's daughter carried a prisoner's bastard child." The scandal broke before Catherine could tell anyone else. One of the other deputies had seen the two of them together in the jail. Catherine's hand reaching through the bars, Marcus pressing his lips against her fingers. The deputy, a man named Coleman who'd been trying to court Catherine unsuccessfully for 3 years, didn't keep it quiet. He told the barkeeper. The barkeeper told his wife. By morning, every person in Redemption knew. The reaction was immediate and vicious. Catherine couldn't walk down the street without being spat upon. Store owners refused to serve her. Women who'd been her friends crossed the street rather than greet her. And worse, they looked at her father with pity, as if he'd failed as a man, failed to control his daughter, failed to protect the family honor. Jacob's authority in the town, built over 18 years of fair enforcement and careful politics, crumbled like sand. Challenges came almost immediately. A man named Brennan, who ran gambling operations out back of saloon, decided it was time for a change in power. He began undermining Jacob in public, suggesting that a man whose daughter was a pregnant whore couldn't possibly maintain order. Then there was the incident with the shooting. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. A traveling salesman had gotten drunk and started a fight in the Silver Dollar Saloon. Jacob was called to break it up, and in the chaos of the altercation, the drunk reached for a gun. Jacob moved to disarm him, and the gun went off. The bullet passed through Jacob's shoulder and into the wall behind him. Jacob would survive, but barely. Brennan used the moment. While Jacob was bleeding and barely conscious, Brennan organized a group of men and took over the jail. They released the prisoners. Not violently, not in a way that technically constituted jailbreak, but systematically and thoroughly. By the time the doctor had finished bandaging Jacob's wound, half the criminal elements of the territory had been released back onto the streets. The town spiraled. Within a week, there were 3 murders. The saloon was robbed. A ranch on the outskirts was burned. Brennan appointed himself acting sheriff, and no one challenged him because Jacob was injured and broken, and everyone understood that the town's moral foundation had been compromised. But something unexpected happened. The women of the town, the ones who'd been harshest on Catherine, began to understand something. They understood that their husbands and sons were no longer safe. They understood that the rule of law had been replaced by Brennan's rule of power. And they began to whisper that Catherine's sin, whatever it was, paled in comparison to the chaos that had consumed their lives. Catherine was 8 months pregnant when she went to her father's office. He was there, still recovering, his arm in a sling, his face gaunt from pain and shame. He looked at his daughter, this woman who'd cost him everything, and something broke open in his chest. "I'm sorry," Catherine said. "I'm sorry that I lied to you. I'm sorry that I betrayed your trust. I'm sorry that my actions have destroyed this town." "You didn't destroy the town," Jacob said slowly. The town destroyed itself. The moment we decided that your sin was worse than our own, we were lost. He stood with difficulty, and Catherine helped him to his feet. I'm going to do something I should have done weeks ago, Jacob said. I'm going to fight for my position. I'm going to take back what's mine. And I'm going to make sure that my daughter isn't treated like a pariah in the town her family has bled to protect. That evening, Jacob Hartwell walked into the saloon where Brennan was holding court. He was weak from injury, his arm still bandaged, his movement slow. But he had his gun. You're finished, he said to Brennan. Get out of redemption tonight, or I will put you in the ground. Brennan laughed. You're broken, Jacob. You don't have the strength to. He didn't get to finish. 3 townspeople stood up, the barkeeper, the blacksmith, and old Samuel who ran the general store. They positioned themselves beside Jacob. Then 2 more. Then 5. Then 10. The men who'd understood that law, however imperfect, was better than chaos. The men who'd realized that Catherine's sin was individual, but Brennan's violence was systemic. Brennan left before dawn. Catherine gave birth to a son on a cold December morning, with the doctor in attendance and the women of the town waiting outside the door. When they heard the baby's cry, something shifted in the collective consciousness of redemption. The child was here. The sin was real. And yet life continued. The town continued. 3 years later, when a pardon came through for Marcus, his family's lawyers finally proving that he'd been coerced by more powerful men to commit the robbery, he rode back into redemption on a horse that looked like it had traveled hard. Catherine was at the well when she saw him. She had a child at her hip, a boy with Marcus's dark eyes, and another on the way. She set down her bucket and waited for him to approach. I kept your promise, Marcus said. I survived. I came back. I didn't know if you would, Catherine said. I didn't know either, Marcus replied. I spent 3 years in that prison thinking about you, about our child, about the possibility that you might have moved on, married someone respectable, built a life I couldn't be part of. He reached out and touched their son's face. But I had to come back. I had to know. Jacob Hartwell watched from his office as his daughter and the man she loved stood in the street. The town was watching too, some with judgment, some with mercy, some with simple human recognition that life was more complicated than they'd initially believed. Jacob called Marcus into his office that evening. If you marry my daughter, Jacob said, you'll be staying in redemption. You'll be building a legitimate life. You'll be raising our grandchildren. Can you do that? I can, Marcus said. I will. I spent 3 years thinking about it. I'm ready. They were married quietly, with only Catherine's father as witness. There was no scandal this time, just quiet acceptance from a town that had learned, through chaos and suffering, that people were more than their worst mistakes. 10 years later, redemption was thriving. Marcus had become a lawyer, using his education and his experience with the criminal system to help others navigate the law without making his mistakes. Catherine had opened a school for the children of the town, and shared Jacob Hartwell, who'd nearly lost everything, had built something stronger in the ruins of his shame, a town where people were judged by their actions over time, not by their moments of weakness. The story of what happened when the sheriff's daughter got pregnant by a prisoner didn't destroy the town. Instead, it revealed the town's true character. It showed that civilization isn't built on perfection, but on the willingness of people to forgive, to learn, and to move forward together. It proved that love, however unconventional, could be redemptive, and it taught redemption that justice was far more complicated than hanging criminals. Sometimes it meant letting them come home.